My name is Tom Adeyoola. I'm the CEO and founder of Metail. Metail is essentially a company which delivers virtual fitting room services for online clothing retailers. We allow users to create 3D representations of themselves, which they can then use to try on clothes and see how they fit. The origin of Metail came about from two different things. So I was the head of game and product development for a previous company, and I'd got to the point where I was ready to do my own thing, having worked in several different startups over the course of my professional career. And I had seen some really interesting technology at Cambridge University when I was going up there to try and solve a different problem I was having at the time with my existing business that I was working for. I met a guy called Professor Roberto Cipolla. He had done a lot of really interesting research on going from 2D photos of Antony Gormley statues to 3D shape. So much so that actually the way that Antony Gormley builds a lot of his sculptures now is from using that underlying technology to take photos of himself, wrapped in cling film, naked if sometimes if possible, and then rebuilds that into positional structures in 3D shape, which he can then build sculptures. I thought that was really interesting, and it really brought home the sort of growing maturity of computer vision technology. And then it was actually, in terms of sort of relating that to the business world and a real personal problem, it was from going to Vietnam with my girlfriend. She was complaining a lot about online shopping, but not just online shopping, actual physical shopping. And the pain and dilemma of going into changing rooms, trying stuff on, stuff not fitting, getting frustrated, and finding sort of shopping in general really a frustrating experience. And we were in Vietnam, and she had some stuff tailor-made in Hoi An, and she sort of had stuff made which you wouldn't normally find on the high street because her shape doesn't fit a lot of the sort of general forms of high street brands that she would like to buy. So having gone all the way to Vietnam to get clothes that could fit her, I thought, well, maybe using technology that could create a 3D representation of yourself, we wouldn't need to travel halfway across the world to actually find something that would work. So I then spent a lot of time sort of trying to think and understand what had happened in online clothing retail since the real sort of last internet boom of 98, 99, when there was a company called Boo.com that had raised $130 million. I nearly joined that company in 98, 99. And I wanted to understand where online retail was going, what had happened, what were the trends. I spent a lot of time looking at the space, and it really seemed to me that the sort of trends were all going in the right direction. The growing Facebook generation, online clothing retail growth with the likes of ASOS and Net-a-Porter, cloud computing, and added to that the growing maturity of computer vision meant to me that the inevitability of solving online clothing fit was upon us, and that real holy grail of being able to do virtual fitting room technology seemed to really be possible. I think I'd always wanted to do stuff that had a purpose and felt like it created something at the end of it. When I was at university, I studied at Cambridge University, and I did economics, so the natural flow would have been to go into banking, consulting, etc., or another institution. And in fact, those were the only sort of companies that came to Cambridge for the milk round back when I was studying, 95 to 98. But I did an internship at Citibank. I really did enjoy it, and I felt I was just moving paper around, and it didn't really give that sense of satisfaction of creating something, growing something, and having a real impact. I then did actually, after university, go and work for a consultancy for a year. I worked for a consultancy called Zedis Associates, so I ended up working on the AstraZeneca big tech merger, and as I'm half Norwegian, I ended up using my languages in my first job, so I worked on the merger in Scandinavia, in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. The internet boom was happening right about the same time, and it seemed really exciting. And through actually trying to create my own internet startup, Len, as a early 20-something, I met a lot of interesting people in tech and ended up joining an internet startup. And once I joined that, it was an exciting dynamic, the ability to get responsibility quite early on. It was very meritocratic. felt like you're all trying to achieve something and grow something, that was infectious and something that, you know, definitely put a stamp on where my career was going to go thereafter. As the internet boom turned to bust, I left with the marketing director and joined actually 3G in the pre-launch phase, which became the mobile company 3. And that was, again, exciting. I think it was the biggest startup in corporate history, 0 to 1,700 people in a year. I'd always been a sort of clever guy working for senior management and strategy, which felt like a niche. And so I talked to some people about potentially, should I do an MBA? What should I do? But I met somebody who had done an MBA at INSEAD, and they said, no, don't do that, come work for me. So I went to work for her at a company called Inspired Gaming Group, where I essentially sold in the concept of broadband network gaming and took that project into Gala Group, and then built the casino division at Inspired from scratch and took that global. And that really gave me the sort of 2 pillars of skills I didn't have, which were how to build a product from concept all the way through to scale to roll out, and also how to manage big teams of people. I'd always been a strategy guy, and then I finally added those 2 bits, which made me feel ready to then do my own. And that's the bit that's exciting, you know. I guess you could say, have I always felt that I wanted to be in fashion or that side of technology? No, but the disruptive side of technology is what really excites me, like going into an industry, turning around, changing it. And actually having come into fashion, I've really enjoyed the people that are in this space. And I feel it's quite an interesting space. And because of the nature of fast fashion, it is always turning around. Things are always changing, and that's really fascinating. When I started Metail, I spent a lot of time researching the space and what had gone before, and there had been a lot of false prophets and false dawns of people trying to solve the problem of online clothing fit. So that really made me think really hard about the business model and what needed to truly be solved to create a transactional utility, disruptive technology play. So a lot of people that had gone before had ended up becoming purely a marketing gimmick or a marketing tool. So I wanted to try and understand why and what were the key levers. For me, there were 3 key things that we needed to solve to create a really exciting business. So first was to allow users at home to create body models from very basic information. A lot of people in the past had gambled on there being a laser scanner in every shopping mall, in every town, in every country. That wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. So this needed to be something that the user could create a 3D version really quickly, fast, and from basic information. So that was the core initial bit of what we then sort of started working on in terms of R&D. The second piece actually is the unsexy piece, which was actually the most important. You know, the ability to digitize clothing really fast and really cheaply so that you could work with mass market retailers who in this era are sort of digitizing and putting live in excess of 50,000 garments per year across women's wear. So, you know, that's the likes of ASOS, Next, etc., etc. So to work with those guys, you know, you can't have something which is really expensive, really difficult, something where they have to send clothes to somewhere else. I needed something, and I wanted something that could be within the supply chain of the retailer. And actually, in terms of my goal, I sort of said, well, if I couldn't see a pathway to delivering digitization of garments at a sub £3 level, it wasn't going to be interesting to me. And most people who'd gone before were in the £300 to £400 space. So, you know, at £300 to £400, you're talking about £40,000 worth of cost for just 100 garments. And we're talking about retailers who have 50,000 garments. So it needed to be really fast and cheap. And that's where we've actually done a huge amount of R&D. We've got granted patents now in the US, and patents pending across Europe and the UK, and where we continue to innovate, and where we've also received government grant funding to that end. Then the third piece of the jigsaw puzzle is about putting 3D bodies together with 3D garments and creating that visual combination so that people can see and understand fit and how it would go together, and also deliver sizing recommendations. So as a consequence of that, you know, I've always felt that visual element to this whole process was really critical and important, and hence we're the only people that allow you to create a 3D representation of yourself, which you can then outfit build, create different garments, put them on together, and do that really quickly and create that sort of almost personal avatar, which we call a me model. Otherwise, in terms of competition, they sort of split into two spheres. There's one sphere who do a visual element of a garment against a robotic mannequin shape, really expensive, and also you can only do one garment at a time, and therefore it's non-scalable for mass market retailers. The other side of competition is all sort of database level. So you input information about yourself, what you bought in the past, what type of preferences you have for clothes, and then they will feed back and rank all other clothes based on the data that you've input. So that's a really data level, and it's not really personalized in terms of providing a visual output. And for me, the visual output was always key in the sense of you as a user would only really care about putting in information and reuse a product if you had a tangible output that you could see and use again and again and again, and that needed to be a virtual visual user. And from working with partners such as ITV, we've also seen that users, by adding the visual element, can see what works for them much quicker than just using data. And those two things together make the online fitting room experience a much improved fitting room experience, and brings it much closer to what people are used to in the physical space in shopping malls and in shops. When I started Metail, I always wanted to be global from the beginning. I certainly felt that a lot of UK businesses suffer from low expectations and low aspirations in terms of how they want to grow their business, and always feel that the UK business is big enough and they want to grow in the UK first before going global. Whereas the only successful ones, in fact, out of Europe, have always thought global first. And that's a strength of Israeli companies, it's a strength of Swedish companies. And that's the only way to grow real scale and generate real businesses that will last. I remember seeing a table of software companies in the UK, the biggest of which is SAP at 25 billion at the time that I was looking at the graph. It was a long way down to the next, and that's because all of the good sort of software companies in the UK sell out to the US really quickly. There were only about £5 billion plus software businesses in Europe at the time, and I was looking at this list, and I thought that was a massive shame. And given that it is an internet technology space and it is software, there is no reason not to be able to go global day one. There's no reason not to be able to work with companies out in Asia, in South America, anywhere. And that certainly was an aspiration, and that's something that we're sort of already delivering. So we already work out in Asia with Metail, and we opened as of last week our first Asia office, so I've got that based in Asia now. We're about to do sort of a bigger rollout in Brazil, so we've got a team going out there next month. And I've also got a guy in North America starting to look at that region for us more clearly. And we also work in Germany, so we have our stuff translated into German. And there really is no excuse for not going global. When you think about it, certainly as we're an enabling technology for clothing retailers, there are essentially two touch points in terms of the globalization or localization piece. One is changing the language. We have minimized the amount of language in our application to make it as easily configurable as possible. So translation is not a problem. That's a really quick and fast turnaround. The other piece is doing the garment photography, but again, that's the case where we built a system and a rig that can go within the supply chain of the retailer. So it's a case of sending a team out, installing the rig in the retailer's supply chain, training the local staff on how to do it, and then allowing them to get on with it from that moment onwards. And then you can have an account-based relationship, which is either over email, Skype, conference calls with the occasional visit. So there is no reason not to do those deals. And effectively, certainly especially in a sort of crisis time that we've been through in terms of credit crisis and recession, as a business, you should always be focused on where are the fastest growing markets. And a lot of the really fast growing markets in terms of online and clothing retail are outside of the UK. The UK was really struggling through the recession. A lot of the clothing retailers were over leveraged in terms of debt. So the real fast growing streams were the likes of Asia, the likes of Brazil and South America, and that's where the excitement is. So you want to put your technology into those fast-flowing rivers. When I started looking at the fashion retail space for technology, actually one of the biggest sort of plus sides of it is that it's a highly consolidated market. So I think in the UK, the top 10 retailers are 50% of the market, top 20 are 70% of the market. So that made it really easy to identify both in the UK and globally who the biggest companies and the most suitable companies to work with for us were. And then from that basis, we have a really quite clear list of who we should be going after, and then we can spend the time and effort on trying to find ways in. And a big mantra of mine is networking, and I've been really lucky enough through networking to build a base of investors who have very good connections into a lot of clothing retailers, be that retail banking analysts, be that industrialists, etc. And in terms of the relationships to the big companies that we've worked with so far outside of the UK, actually those ones have come opportunistically almost. So in the case of Zalando, Rocket Internet Group were really focused on growing clothing retail online faster than anyone to really essentially take the market. So naturally, therefore, Zalando was going to be a really core potential customer to work with. Their approach was they wanted to be the biggest online in Europe, and they achieved that last year, and they're heading towards an IPO. So growth. So as a consequence, as I mentioned in the previous answer, you want to get into the fast-flowing streams. And actually, I think with Zalando, they hired quite aggressively MBAs out of INSEAD. We had an intern who had come from INSEAD to do an MBA, and then subsequently joined us. So he had some contacts into Zalando, went over to visit them. We had initial conversations and grew that relationship into the organisation to do something and experiment from there. Dafiti then are the sister company of Zalando. So from the work we were doing with Zalando, that fed through to Dafiti, who then asked us to essentially start a trial with them. So we were pulled to Dafiti, if you like, from that relationship. And then in terms of Asia, we were also pulled into that relationship. So Singtel were doing a global sweep of interesting technologies that they wanted to consider and have conversations with, and they found us. And the CEO of the digital segment of their organisation came over to visit us. So we were pulled into those markets. We are now at the point where we are trying to proactively push into those markets. And that's a change for us in terms of over the last 3 years. So in 2012, we built a product. We put it out to some UK in the main based retailers that we had built relationships into through networking, and we wanted to see how well that would do. And in terms of some of those relationships, again, they came quite opportunistically through networks. So we ended up rolling out with Tesco in early 2012, and that was a case of my old housemate's girlfriend temping at Tesco, overhearing a conversation on the table behind her about virtual fitting rooms and wondering what they should do in that space, and then saying, well, my housemate's good friend has some technology in that space, and then getting invited to have a conversation. So by networking, talking about your product to everyone and everybody, and not being naive enough to think that you have to hold back your company and progress and that things should be secret, that's really helped me over the time. So I've tried to build relationships, I've tried to talk to interesting people, and if you have interesting conversations with interesting people, they open up what you're doing to their networks, and then it grows from there. And the same with my investor group. So over time, by them seeing the progress we've made, they've gradually opened up their network and talked about us to interesting people whenever they meet them. So my network really works hard for me, and that's been a really exciting thing that has come out of doing a startup that I wouldn't have quite appreciated. The amount of goodwill that you can get from people that you meet, which can be transformational for your own business. And hence, networking meeting interesting people. I'm always willing and want to meet interesting people, even if at first sight they don't seem like they have direct relevance to your sector. The fact that they're an interesting person means that they know interesting people, and they're real great connectors and opinion formers in their space. So they are people you should meet, and you never know when that's going to pay off. It might be in 6 months, it might be 12 months, it might even be in 18 months, but it all has an impact, and it all helps to grow the business. In terms of global reach and communities having a low purchasing power and not basically being able to buy the luxury goods, I've always felt that Metail is about the masses. Metail is for everyone. My ultimate goal is for everyone to have their own me model, and a me model to be a clothing companion for users from morning until night. So you wake up in the morning, you look at your smartphone and you go, well, what should I wear today? And you're looking through your wardrobe, you see a magazine, you scan the dress, you see that against your body model. Again, you choose to buy, you watch TV, and so on and so forth. So to be a method in which you can buy clothing. And in terms of low purchasing power, I think the ability to be mobile, to be everywhere, and to use it actually is probably a good thing for the likes of the African countries, where mobile is moving faster than internet is. So the phone penetration is high. We will still be limited by smartphone penetration. From there, though, because of that, the point I mentioned about wanting to make sure that we could digitize clothing really exceptionally cheaply, that will allow us to basically digitize all price points of clothing, not just luxury. In fact, luxury for me is a late adoption piece, and it's actually about the mass markets and all products. And then from there, it's actually about us delivering better sales for customers and better sales for retailers. So if you're a customer, you are pointed towards clothes that are going to work better for you and fit better to your shape, and you're going to have to return less because you're going to make better choices straight out of that. So actually, we should be a helpful tool for all customers, no matter what, because if you've got low purchasing power or high purchasing power, you still buy clothes to wear, and there is an element of fashion related to that. You want stuff that makes you look good, and you have a right to buy stuff that makes you look good as much as anyone else. And Primark is great, and actually Primark is considered fashion in a way that potentially Tesco isn't. So those products are low price point, but they have fashion value, they have fashion credibility, and there's no reason why any user shouldn't be able to filter through the huge volume of product that is out there towards stuff that's really going to work well.